That was great. So good evening, everybody. My name is Fiona D, and my role is Digital Learning Lead with Waterford and Wexford ETB. And I'm delighted to be here with you this evening to follow on from Sinead, to show you some of the tools mentioned when embedding inclusive and diverse digital practices in teaching, learning and assessment. And our focus in WWETB Digital Learning this year is to identify and promote the existing accessibility tools that are available across our Microsoft Office 365 tenancy, and supporting the rollout of these tools to allow us to develop time-saving and inclusive workflows for both teachers and learners. So let's have a quick look. We'll explore the digital toolkit for inclusive teaching and learning. We'll explore means of accommodating diversity in our classes. We'll discover workflows between Office 365, Teams, and primarily then the Microsoft Edge browser. And then we'll do a kind of a guideline towards the ease of access options in Windows 10 at the end. And underpinning all of that, as we're trying to embed this in our schools with our teachers and our students, our underpinning, I suppose, focus as well is promoting that independent learning for students who use accessible technologies. So I'm going to get started now with what we'll cover rather than reading us through any lists there. So I'm going to share out my screen. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is our subtitles. So as we strive to accommodate or to provide our EAL learners with, let's just come along here for a second, to strive with a meaningful learning experience, the use of subtitles can greatly enhance the understanding of lesson context. We'll also provide a more inclusive class for learners with hearing impairments. So where you'll find this, if we want to do just a single language translation for students, by selecting your slideshow tab on your ribbon and selecting always use subtitles. And in your subtitle settings, your spoken language will be set to English and your subtitle language can then be set to a language of your choice. So at the moment, I'm just going to go down here to our Ukrainian. A lot of us are trying to provide the Ukrainian students with an inclusive learning experience in our classes. And when we turn on those subtitles, we can also decide where we're going to have them display on our screen. So by default, they'll be down at the bottom, but I might just be using a blank PowerPoint slide. I don't need to have content in the slide when I'm using PowerPoint on the desktop. I can just open up a blank slide and turn on my subtitles. And when we then go into slideshow and play from the current slide, I'll see listening down in the bottom right-hand corner. And after a minute, my subtitles will start to appear very accurately at the top of my screen. Now, you're not bound to sit at your device while those subtitles are appearing. You do have quite a bit of range and it still remains quite accurate as you're moving around your class. So a very good way if you're trying to put context on maybe a brief, a CBA outline, a project outline, and you really want students to get the grasp of the context and not to have to struggle with the understanding of what you're looking for. But sometimes we'll encounter where we have more than one language in our class. We might have visiting students and so on. So I'm going to switch here now into my browser. And from our Office 365 apps, I'm going to go in here into, excuse me, my presentation online, my PowerPoint online. Now, in PowerPoint Online, I will need a little bit of content on my slide. And it's only when I click into the slide and activate it, that up here on my ribbon, over to the right-hand corner, I get my present option. And when I select the drop-down, I'll be able to present live. And this time, what will happen is it'll generate a QR code or a join link that can be copied into a Teams post or to an email. So students can come up, just scan the code, and they'll be asked then to choose their language of choice for translation. And as the teacher then, once everybody has joined, you'll notice how many have joined in your class, and then we can show and continue with our slides, and we'll see that anything I'm narrating will appear in English at the bottom of the screen, but the students will see it in their language of choice on the screen. So that's our subtitles, a really useful tool for creating that inclusive environment and including our EAL learners. Now I'm going to just switch because we're going to talk a lot today about the immersive reader and the learning tools that are free to us in our Office 365 tenancy. And the immersive reader, which is available in our view menu and immersive reader. And it improves comprehension, encourages independent reading, and is simple for students to use. So let's have a look at it firstly, and then I'll talk about how we approach it in our schools. So for this, I'm going to switch to Microsoft Word, and I'm going to open up here my document learning tools. And again, I'm going into my view menu. So we're training our students, we're showing them that by opening the view menu in any of the Office apps that they're using and accessing the immersive reader and highlighting the little icon to train their eye to spot this little icon across all of their apps. So into my immersive reader. And we'll see here that we have a number of options. We have our text preferences, our grammar options, and our reading preferences. My text preferences are really the first port of call for all students because these allow the student to customize their learning environment, their digital learning environment. So by adapting their text size, increasing their spacing, or turning that off if they feel they don't need it, adapting the font to suit their needs, and more importantly, selecting the background color that will help learners with additional needs like dyslexia feel that they have a more inclusive environment. Once we have the learning environment set up, we can then have a look at improving things like comprehension. So when we ask our learners to look at a piece of text, it could be from a website, we'll see that in Microsoft Edge later on, but I can ask my students, if we're concentrating on language, I can ask them then to come in, to turn on the syllables if they're having trouble with the comprehension or the pronunciation, and to then, if I'm dealing with particular language areas, to turn on those nouns or those adjectives and to show the labels so that they can start to identify the parts of the text. And again, the immersive reader, going back to those areas of need that Sinead was talking about, so she mentioned language and literacy, but when students become aware of these tools and they're embedded across the curriculum, they start then to realize that they can self-manage their learning environment and adapt it to suit their own needs, so organize their learning environment to suit them. But let's look, before we move on, let's have a look then at our reading preferences. And again, our students have different needs. We may have a student who might find the reading environment very, very cluttered. And by turning on line focus, they'll be able to decide whether they want to show 1 line or 3 lines, depending on the text that I've copied into it, or 5. And it will block out all of the other distraction that may be on the page. For our EAL learners, we also have the picture dictionary, which by default will be turned on. And as we hover over certain words, we'll see a little outline. And when we click on it, it will give us that audio that students can listen to. And will also give us that little image that will help students with the comprehension of the language. And speaking of our audio or our read aloud, the read aloud option will allow learners to focus on the content of the document. So to sit back, to listen, and to start to understand the comprehension of the document. And this is why we advise learning tools for all students, not about additional need, but for all students, because it's a really good way of getting students to sit back, to listen what they're submitting for their projects, for their homework, and so on, and to hear the errors, to hear the content of what they're submitting to you. And finally, for our EAL learners, in those reading preferences, we also have the translate option. Now, we mightn't be encouraging our students to do this all the time, but when we've handed out a brief and we're asking them to look at it that evening, or to, go through it again and to pick out what they're going to do and so on, it might help the student to select their language. So again, I'm going to go down here now because we're focusing a little bit on Ukrainian at the minute. So I'm going to come down here. Okay, And I'm going to translate that document. And what we have now is the student can sit back, they can understand the context of the original document that you've given to them, and they sit nicely side by side. So a great way for the student to feel inclusive in the tasks that are being provided, and to also help them to understand what exactly you're looking for in the particular task. So for our part, these accessibility tools can be introduced in first year for all students, either during a student induction or scheduled IT classes. However, embedding them across digital learning in all subjects and creating awareness at school level will empower students to self-direct their learning, and they'll be able to customize their digital learning space, subsequently improving their engagement. So let's have a look, because it's about the repetition and it's about identifying where these tools sit. So before I come out of, or I have come out, but I'll go back in very briefly, but you'll see when I'm in Word Online, we've started off here in Word Online. And when I'm in Word Online, I can't edit my document. And we may have some learners who would benefit greatly from being able to stay in that immersive reader and to edit the document as they're going along. So I'm now going to switch down to my Word on the desktop. And you'll see here, I have that same document. Where am I going to find my immersive reader? I'm coming up to my View tab on the ribbon, and I'm going into Immersive Reader. Slightly differently laid out in the web app on the desktop. But we still have the option to work away with some of the tools. I have my column width and so on, but I'm going to focus now on being able to edit that document. So the student can stay in the immersive reader and can carry out any changes that need to be made. So that's a great benefit for learners who will benefit from just staying in here and having no distraction. A lot of our students will work also in Microsoft OneNote. And when we switch into Microsoft OneNote, and you'll see here, I've collapsed the navigation just so we can see the page here for a second. And you'll see, where am I going to find it again in my view menu? We're drawing the student attention to that immersive reader. But what I'm also looking at in OneNote, I'm looking also that students independently can change their page color. So if I start off and I roll out a page that has no rules or no lines on it, and the student sees that's the way the page is laid out, but they may benefit from changing that background color themselves. So that self-directed changing of their environment so that they can engage in the learning better. And we also have then, I'm going to just expand the navigation here for a second. Over here to the right, we also have nicely included in our View tab is our translate option, again for our Ukrainian students or our students of other languages. So we'll select translate, and I'm going to translate that page. And when I select translate, it will automatically generate the translation of that page beneath the page in the page overview over here in my navigation. So some nice little tools in OneNote for our students to self-direct their learning and to be able to use the tools outside of the classroom. Okay. So by embedding these tools across the school, students have access to learning, and you're creating an inclusive environment for all learners. So I want now, Sinead spoke about choice and providing choice for learners. So I want to switch back in here now to Microsoft Word for a moment. I'm going to come out of my immersive reader, and I'm just going to get a blank new page here for a second. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dictate now for a second and just some of its uses. So we're going to identify where learners will benefit when barriers are removed, and by providing a choice in how they can relay or impart their knowledge, we're facilitating an inclusive mode of engaging in assessment for the learner. So rather than having to type, that can often be a barrier for a number of students. So by training or guiding our students to practice using Dictate, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch on Dictate, and what I want you to do is just follow along here where my cursor is on the document, so you'll see the changes that I'm making. This is my work experience. Full stop. New paragraph. Today was my first day and I really enjoyed it. Full stop. Select experience. Delete. So that's just a very brief overview, but we clearly need to give students some guidance on some of the commands that they can use, the new paragraph and so on, being able to select a word and to delete it, to give them a flow of using dictate. Now, some of the uses, so we're seeing the benefits of showing this to teachers for tasks that students might need to do outside of the classroom. So for example, recording work experience in real time, submitting project outlines for practical subjects. And it also allows for the teacher to provide audio feedback, which we'll look at shortly in Teams assignments. But before we move out away from dictate, I just want to show you very briefly, I'm just going to switch back here to my slideshow and just let me get that for a second. Bear with me. And okay, now seeing that, Sinead? Yeah, it's there. Okay. All right then. So a lot of our students, so my subtitles are still appearing there, but that's fine. A lot of our students in schools will use the OneNote app on their phone, and that sometimes may be the way they'll access it for submitting homework and so on. So what we're trying to do is expand that a little bit if they're out on a trip or if they're completing their work experience. So what they'll do is, I just have a couple of screenshots there for you. Oops, just go back there again. They'll open up the notebook app, the OneNote app on their phone. They'll select the notebook that they want to dictate to, select in their learner portfolio, in their own area, they'll select the section, their work experience, and then when they click onto the page, they'll see the tools that are available to them appear. So by selecting dictate, they'll immediately be able to record what they've done for the day in real time. This is hugely time saving in terms of asking students to recall in a class when you bring them back into the classroom after the work experience. So we're hoping that dictate, by also providing choice, will also expand the possibilities across subjects for teachers. Now, let's just look. Now, I'm not coming out of there. End the show there for a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's continue. And again, we have that across our OneNote. So by just coming back here to my home tab on the ribbon, and we'll see over to the right-hand side, we have our dictate. So broadly becoming available in a lot of our apps and very easy and simple for students to use. But again, just customizing those commands and giving them a little bit of guidance on how best to use it for themselves. Okay. Before we move on, I just want to come back into Word here for a second, and I just want to talk a little bit about something that Sinead mentioned earlier. And I suppose it's about when we're creating our own resources, and we do have a lot of tools now in Word and PowerPoint and so on that help us to create those documents, to future-proof those documents and to make sure that they are accessible. Now, I'm not going to go into all of those today, but just to point out that in your review tab, you do have check accessibility, which will remind you of things if a font is not legible. Now, I don't have much content there, but if a font is not legible, if you haven't got alt text on your images for screen readers, for assistive technologies, and so on. So all we'll do today is we'll just look at inserting an image onto the page. Saved pictures and insert. Okay, so once we have that picture, you'll see sometimes it will give us a banner depending on the source of the image. If this was a camera image, we'll see an option there to click on the alt text to add it to the image, and our alt text pane will open here at the side. Now, when you have that open, if it's just a decorative image and serves no purpose to clarify any particular point, you can just mark it as decorative, and you'll get a little bit of information there telling you that people using screen readers will hear these are decorative, so they'll know they're not missing any important information. If, on the other hand, it serves the purpose of explaining a point that you're making in the document, then it will automatically generate an explanation of the image, and you can decide to customize that if you need to. But the alt text on images is becoming something that we really do require. Now, before we move on to the next area, which is we're going to look at those workflows that I was talking about, I'm just going to come back in here just for a second, and I'm just going to come back here to this slide just for 1 minute. So what we've done so far is we've looked at the immersive reader in Word Online, in Word Desktop. We've looked at it in our OneNote for Windows 10, and we're now going to see and locate where it is in our Edge browser and Teams. So you can see here from this infographic that I've put up for you that it's really available across all of the Office apps. We just won't get time to touch on them all this evening, but I hope you're getting kind of a clear idea of the repetitive process. If we embed that into the student induction and the student learning, they'll become those tools that they'll go to when they need them. Okay, so let's move now to our Edge browser, and you'll notice that I'm going to the Edge browser a lot of the time when I'm working, and it's because our Office 365 tools are here. So I'm going to go now to a new tab. And what may put you off with the Edge browser, if you're very used to Chrome, Google Chrome, and you're quite happy and that's what you use with your students, people are reluctant to change. But if you can get rid of all that unnecessary content, and you can do that in your settings, or you might have an engineer who may do that for you. So you'd adapt your page settings to get rid of all the news feeds, get rid of all the advertising, the clutter, and so on. And you're left then with your landing page that has your search box, but also up in the top left corner has the app launcher, the Office Waffle for students. And by clicking on that, they can automatically go to their Office 365. So that's one of the first things that I like about it. That landing page brings them directly to their Office 365 account and makes it very accessible. So the next thing we're going to look at is the research that students are doing when we ask them to go into a browser. So I may have asked a student, we may be looking for news articles about a particular topic. So I'm going to go into one of the online papers, and I'm going in here now to journal. And we'll see when we go in, we get a landing page of links, and I am going in here, we're talking about data protection and security online. So a student might link in here. And as soon as they link into the article, have a look up here at the address bar. And you'll see again, what are we seeing here? We're seeing that icon for immersive reader. So the student, and this is also very useful for a teacher, we might be working through a web page on the screen. We can enter that immersive reader to get rid of all those ads, to get rid of all that bluster and clutter that can only cause a distraction for learners. And you can see again, we get our read aloud, we get our text preferences, we get our grammar tools and our reading preferences. And amongst our text preferences, we also get the text column style. So we can, you know, if we had that visual crowding that might be off-put some students, if they're looking at it, you can advise them that they can narrow it down and just focus in on shorter lines and so on. So again, back to those tools again. So we're continuing what we're trying to do in other apps with the students when they are starting their research. And if I just turn off the immersive reader there for a second, and finally tying in, I suppose, with their research in the Edge browser is this feature here over to the right of the address bar called collections. And we're finding these are a really useful way of creating a very nice workflow for the students, and could also be for the teacher if you're collecting for a particular topic, an area, subject area. You could collect all the resources that you might like to use into your collections here. So let's just take a brief look at it. So we might be doing, your students might come in, you might say, right, we're going to do some research now for the project we're going to do. So you'll ask them to start a new collection and they'll give that a name. So we'll call it our economics project. Okay. And if the page that you've been looking at, if you find the student might decide, yeah, that's a really relevant one, I've had a look at it and I'm going to add that current page, that's going to be the first site that I'm going to use as part of my research. But what we can do here now, rather than just getting students to click into sites and just add them to make a list of the sites they're using, we can ask them to reflect on what they're choosing. And by coming up here and selecting add a note, we can ask them to pick out, again, pick 3 things that you found relevant on the site that you've chosen. So it might say, we might say GDPR can have economic consequences. Okay, I'm not going to write it all there now. So we're asking the student to make little notes as they're going along. We also might say to them, you know, don't forget to get some useful images. So they might say, oh yeah, that'd be a really good one. Right click it and we can add it to the collection. So that's going into my economics project. And then we're asking them then, be sure now to pick out some of what you're going to reference from the site. So they might say, earlier this year, so there's a good one there, 17 million fine. So that's going to impact their economics, I'd imagine. So I'm going to right click there and I'm going to add to the collection and it's going into my economics project. So I'm now nicely building up some information that relates to what I'm doing. And when we've spent some time researching, we may want evidence of that in the portfolio that we're going to submit. So we have then this workflow that where we can integrate it into either sending it to OneNote or sending it to Microsoft Word. So I'm going to go with Microsoft Word just for today. I'm going to click in here to send it to Microsoft Word. Taking a little bit of time, and it will open up into a Word online document, which shows me the name of my collection, my first link, my article, the link to the article, my little notes that I've made, any images and any text that I've copied, and referring then to where I located the information. And if we wanted to have a look at where is that located within the student files, in our OneDrive, if we come up here to our OneDrive, our students are saving to Microsoft OneDrive, and we'll see that it automatically creates in my files a Microsoft Edge collections folder. And that's where all of the exported to Word, all of the collections will be available there. So the students have a nice record of any research that they're doing. So that, I suppose, is the reason. It is a hard sell at times. People are very, very familiar with the browser they want to use. And wait till I just see it's not responding. We'll just exit that page there now. Okay, that's fine. Excuse me. But, you know, slowly but surely, when we've demonstrated this to teachers and they're seeing that nice workflow between research and the collection of work that students are doing, they are giving it a go. And we've had some great feedback for, you know, leaving cycle projects and so on in terms of using that. Okay, then. So the final one that we looked at, I suppose, in our where we're going to look at where the immersive reader is available to us, and that, I suppose, is in our Teams. And we are encouraging our teachers to take the best part of Teams from lockdown. And whether it is just to provide choice for how students take down their homework, so you might say it's on the board, you can take a snapshot of it, you can take it down, or it'll be up in Teams what you have to do. So for students, I'm going to switch now into, just bear with me there for a second. I'll just come back I'll just come back to Teams. I'll stay here. I'm just conscious of time now and people tired after the end of the day. So we'll just stay with it here. But in a student account, what we draw their attention to over here in our more options, when we select it, we'll see there that we have our immersive reader. And for our EAL students, we also have our translate. So again, bringing that into immersive reader. And you'll notice there that I've used a little emoji. I've used my windows and full stop, which will give me a great range of images that I can use as visual guides for learners. And I can say to them, just click beside the visual guide and you can start to read it from there. So it's not covering all of the detail about the date and time and who posted and so on. So using those visual guides are also a great way for the student to be able to self-direct the reading of that notification. Okay then, so that's our use of immersive reader in our posts in Teams. We now want to take a look in here into our assignments. And in our assignments, what we're focusing on this year are the new features of our reading progress and our ability to provide audio feedback. So I'm going to come in here and just create an assignment very briefly so that you'll just see the use of the two of them. And then we'll look at the results of one that a student has submitted. So I'm just going to call it reading task. And we might be inclined, we'd put our instructions in here into the instruction pane, but I'm going to come down here and I'm going to provide audio instruction for the student. So don't be put off by video recording. It doesn't require you to record video. When we get it, I'll just record mic only here now, and you won't hear me for a minute. These are your reading guidelines. And once I've finished, I can just give this a name and upload it to the assignment. It'll take a couple of seconds. And now I want to attach the reading task that we want students to go through. I'm going to import it from Word. I could also take a snapshot, a PDF. I could use my Microsoft Lens to take a snapshot of a page in a book that I'm using and just upload it to the reading progress, because I'll have the option then, when I upload it, I'll have the option to edit it. So I'm going in here to reading progress, and I'm just going to take this junior cycle states of matter. And before we go and adjust that, let's just think about some of the uses, the broader uses of this across classes. So at the moment, we're exploring its effectiveness for supporting race testing, and you'll see the results of the reading progress now in a second. But we're also looking at providing a reading task to support EAL learners. So I might be pushing out an assignment, but I might add a reading task to ask my EAL learners to improve their comprehension and fluency. It's also if we're starting a new topic in a subject area for improving fluency in subject-specific terminology. For MFL learners, for improving language fluency. And I suppose other areas that we could just improve the curriculum broadly across the thing. So I'm going to edit here, and I'm just going to lay it out that little bit better so that students feel that they have a better overview of what I'm looking for here and can read it a little bit more clearly. So I'm just adding some lines there, and once I'm finished, I can just select save, and it will update that document. If I brought in an MFL document and it hasn't detected the language automatically, I can select the language here in my list of languages. And you'll see there that Irish is included, but it still is in kind of development stage. So it will allow them to read, but it's where a reading coach comes in. We won't see a huge amount in the data bank or the library that's associated with Irish at the moment. If I'm adding a reading task for students to ensure that students are reading what I'm giving them in an evening, I may not be too interested in checking the results all the time. So over here to the right-hand side, you may not have to concentrate on this. We might just call it junior cycle general reading. Okay, I leave the number of attempts unlimited, time limit, and so on. Most of these we would go through in more detail when we're doing the training for SEN and SENCOs. Pronunciation sensitivity. If I do have a lot of learners, EAL learners or learners maybe with, a stronger accent or whatever, we might go in here to less sensitive so that it's not picking up on every error. And reading coach, which is in preview, is improving all the time, but already it is of great benefit to students. And when we're ready, then we'll select next. And I'm ready then to assign the task. I'm not going to dwell on the rest of the settings in the assignment for today. We'll just assign out that task. Okay, and it's added to the list of tasks that students are going to read. Now, let's have a look at one that's already been handed in by a student. So I'm going to go in here to my students and in here to student test 4 who has handed it in. And we link here to the reading task that we set them to do. And I can see in the results that have been presented to me. So I'll see straight away, there's a very definite, they had trouble with the pronunciation of the word definite and the word particles. And I can see as I scroll further that they didn't read the entire passage, that they read the first paragraph, got fed up and decided they'd do the homework and not bother with the rest of it. So that is fine. You might say to them, look, you need to read through it again. You need to have that terminology. You need to know it. Okay then, but I can also, if I want to hear how they are pronouncing something, I can just click on the word and it will allow me to jump to that word and listen to it. Okay, so I'm saying define there instead of definite. So it gives me some nice information on how students are doing. I can also see, are they actually practicing the words? Now you may say, well, I'm not going to have time to check all of that. But for SEN, this may be a very nice way to link in with the subject teacher in terms of how the students are doing and improving their reading fluency. So that is the practiced words. It'll show us whether they've used, whether they've listened to the word, whether they've divided the word into syllables, and what tools they've used to help them with the pronunciation and the practice of those words. So a really good tool for embedding literacy across subjects in the school. And before I exit this, I might have a look at this and then look at the homework or the task the student has submitted to me. And now as a teacher, I can come down here, instead of having to type in feedback in the feedback box, I now have access to be able to provide audio feedback by clicking in, just selecting mic only and recording then my feedback, as we did with the, so just come out of it there and exit. Okay, so providing that audio feedback, and students then will be able to listen back to what I'm telling them to do. And a lot of the students will benefit from hearing the teacher voice rather than trying to read what we want them to do to improve or to, you know, do better at the reading or whatever it might be. So that's just a little overview of reading progress and integrating it into everyday tasks in our curriculum. And I suppose it brings me kind of to the end of those tools that we're talking about. But before I finish up on the Office 365 tools or whatever, if we're looking at students with assistive technology, it's a good idea to just have a look overall at our ease of access tools in Windows 10. So I'm just going to show you where these are because I know I'm well over time at this stage. But to access these tools, I'm going to start by just going into speech recognition. So if I go into my control panel in Windows 10, so in the search box in Windows 10, I'm just going to go in there to my control panel. And from the list of options, I'm going to go in here to speech recognition. And this brings me back to what Sinead was saying about preparing students from an early age, from first year onwards, in case they do need to sit an exam in a different way or to present the information they're learning in a different way. And it brings me through the steps that are needed to set up the computer for the learner to be able to use speech recognition. Setting up the microphone, taking the speech tutorial to be able to understand. That's a very useful task for a learner to go through, to be able to learn some of those basic commands and dictation. And then this step here, and this is where the planning comes in, I suppose, in terms of how do we get that student to the level where what they're saying isn't gobbledygook on the screen, but actually has something meaningful and there's not too much correction to be done. So training the computer to understand you better might take up to 5 or 6 sessions of running through, customizing, letting the artificial intelligence customize to your voice and improving the dictation. So that would be one of the areas. And from the speech recognition, you can link very easily to the Ease of Access Center. And in there, then you can explore some of the other tools like the magnifier, which will immediately improve for our students who have any visibility issues. And then if you look through all of the settings that are available, that Ease of Access Center is a great place to get started in terms of, because there are some great tools in Windows 10 and they are becoming that bit easier to use. So I suppose that brings me to the end of my whistle-stop tour. I hope you've enjoyed some of the tools and you can see some uses of them to create that inclusive and, I suppose, diverse learning environment. So Sinead, with that, back to you.
Thanks a million, Fiona. It was such a comprehensive overview